So let's get a little philosophical as we talk about some things that define what music is. Now you've probably thought about a lot or maybe talked with people about like, what is music? Well, we're not really gonna talk about a definition of music right now because that's a big question and that deserves like 15 episodes. But I wanna illustrate a certain point about how to approach something like this from an objective point of view, like we're solving a problem. So I'm gonna ask you a question. Okay, what pieces of information do we need to know about a song to perform a piece of music to its theoretical absolute best? Now this is a trick question because there's no way to ever perform something perfectly. Let's think of it like you're filling out a form on a website. You have the title, artist, album, and the date. What else can we add to this to help us get a clear idea of how we should perform the piece? So I encourage you to pause the video right here, make a little list, write some things down. Don't spend a bunch of time because again, this is a trick question and it's only to illustrate a point. So let's start answering the question. You can have something like the key or the different keys in the song or the time signature or time signatures or the lyricist or the lyrics themselves. But I'm kind of thinking like, can't you get most of the stuff just from reading the sheet music? Okay, so you throw in the sheet music. So does that mean we're done? No. The sheet music doesn't give you an idea for what the piece kind of sounds like. What is the overall feeling of the piece? Is the piece sad? Is it happy? Is it exciting? Is it adventurous? What's the skill level of the piece? Is it something you perform with a less experienced group or with a more experienced group? Okay, so if we had that information, would we be done? Nope. I think you can guess why. Things like the feeling of the piece and the skill level are pretty subjective, right? So part of the purpose of this is to be objective. So let's see if we can alleviate some of that subjectivity by expanding a little bit more on what we're talking about. So for the skill level, we could put something like a number from 1 to 10, or number of years of experience, or even an age, or a grade level. And if you're talking about the feeling of a piece, you probably want to say like what it's about, like loss or love or change, or something that describes what's happening in the song, or just a more detailed description of how it feels. But something's still missing here. These things are still pretty subjective because you could grow up in one place and get a lot of music education or even just have more opportunities. So we're not going to give up yet. We're going to remain objective. So we need to kind of say where we're coming from to make this information useful. For your skill level, you could say like what country that you're basing this off of, or what region or what district. You would say somebody would be able to play this piece at age 12 or age 30. Okay, so what about feeling? People tend to feel feelings the same way, right? Well, kind of. It depends on the language you're speaking in. It also depends on what country or region you're from. The same words can mean different things in different places. And the same concepts of what it means to be sad or what it means to be happy can be completely different in two different places. But then again, people's experiences as individuals are different. So we might as well include information about our own ideas of what these feelings mean. Maybe just tell our life story. I mean, if we're gonna play this piece to an absolute perfect level, we need to know clearly where we're coming from. And if you're thinking what I'm thinking, oh, we can just include a recording. Well, that's easy. Then they can just hear it and know how it sounds, right? Well, not exactly. See, that performance could be influenced by a ton of things. And if you want to have the best possible performance, you don't just want to copy another performance. You want to have different ones to compare and contrast. And you want to know why they made certain stylistic choices. Remaining objective and not giving up. Let's add that in. Okay, so those stylistic choices were made by a director. So why don't we have a little bit of information about the director, a little bit of maybe the director knows the composer. Maybe members of the ensemble have some cultural connection to the piece or the composer or the language or the country. So why don't we just include everyone's life story? And I hope by now you can kind of see where this is going. Pretty soon you're basically just taking all of the information you can possibly find about anything and you're finding some relevance to how it connects to this one song. If you're feeling a little bit confused, just Keep watching. So we can talk about music scientifically, but music is not a science. Usually when we analyze music, we're making a ton of assumptions. We're working within context. If we were to keep going with this all of history thing, you'd end up trying to answer questions objectively like, what is a song, man? Music that takes place in different countries has different sounds. In different regions within a country, different people making music has a different sound. There's different skill levels for different instruments, different days of the year, holidays, different years, the 60s, the 70s. All these things are both independent and interconnected in a million different ways, and there are infinite number of these things. So if the concept of a song can be different between different regions and different people even, how are we able to communicate about music at all? And we totally do. You can easily look up songs online. You can even describe what a song sounds like to another person, and they're not totally confused. Music always exists within contexts where we have definitions of certain things given to us. And it's true, a song is just a construct that we have made. Music exists within these different cultural definitions. When you're communicating about music, you're part of a musical culture. It's a shared body of knowledge that exists between people who make music or listen to music or have music participate in their lives in some form. We have been so ingrained in this musical practice, it's almost like we're living in the Matrix because it's such an important part of our lives. There are so many things surrounding our concept of music that we ourselves have made up. For example, most of my videos are about how to read music within the Western classical music practice. That doesn't mean that music notation is music, or that reading music is the only way to participate as a human in the making of music. Music notation, time signatures, key signatures, all these things are defined within the Western classical music practice. There are many, many other musical practices that might share something with Western classical music, Indian classical music, American folk music, Islamic religious music, but that doesn't mean there's any kind of objective hierarchy at all. Whatever's important to know about a piece is defined within the musical practice, and it serves a purpose within the musical practice that is understood ahead of time. The purpose of the information could be anything. The pragmatic purpose of this information reflects the values of the musical practice. Music practices don't have to exist within a country or an identity. Musical practices can interact with many different kinds of contexts. In fact, musical practices, they're like ideas. They can branch off into different things. They can merge together. They can pop up out of nowhere, and they can disappear just as quickly. And that doesn't mean that those practices are better or worse or anything. It just means that they live and grow and change in these beautiful patterns. One way to think of these shared ideas about what music is that we all consciously or unconsciously have in our heads is to go back to the definition of music itself. As many people, including John Cage, have discussed at length, music is organized sound. Now I'm paraphrasing here, but David Elliot might say this: music is organized sound heard and understood within a context. Now hearing and or understanding music requires a brain, and with hearing and understanding, it always exists within some musical culture, some musical practice. Like a person can only exist in a place, in a time, in a culture. Music can be heard by one person, and that one person can relate to music in its own unique way among many dimensions of meaning that relate to their identity, to their personal story. Like we were listing out my life story as a necessity for describing the feeling of a piece. So a musical practice or a musical culture, you can think of it like a bunch of people hearing and or understanding. And there's this shared body of knowledge. That's what a musical practice or a musical culture is. Part of the reason we can't objectively describe this experience, it's because it's vaguely defined. It's kind of like drawing lines to separate this crowd. In a musical practice, there's a shared body of knowledge among different groups of people. This shared body of knowledge can either strictly define a set of rules or very loosely define a set of traditions. All that to say, music is very subjective and context dependent. Now I can see it's very easy to disagree with me right now. You might be thinking, well, okay, everything is subjective. Isn't music just notes and rhythms? So we should define a piece by its unique combination of notes and rhythms. We should define it by what separates it in its form, in what it's made of. For practical reasons, you're absolutely right. That still happens within a certain context. This definition is missing a ton of information that can very much affect how we perform and listen to music. You might have heard the famous physicist Richard Feynman said, "Music is just drumming with notes." On a more broad philosophical level, this view of music and art in general is called aestheticism. Aestheticism defines art and music as being self-defined. The forms of the music itself defines it uniquely. In fact, those unique forms and structures that make up any given song or piece exist somewhere else. So you have the forms defined, which represents an idea somewhere, and that is realized in performance. So when you analyze a piece of music or a carving or a painting or any other art form, you're trying to detach yourself from any context that might affect your ability to see it for just its own forms. As a part of the aesthetic movement, you might analyze a piece of music or a painting or a statue that has been carved out of stone just for its form alone and no other factors, not how you're feeling that day, not the country, the region, the language, nothing except for its own self-defined forms. Because art exists in this other realm, all of these other factors are just distracting you from seeing the inherent qualities of the art. And you can see how this view of music might be a little limiting. I mean, you might not be aware of it, but you're always influenced by your upbringing, your identity, and unfortunately, this context-free view of music, people kind of just continue to assume that's how music is, and there's no other way to look at it. But music exists within a musical practice. Musical practices have their own view of what's important in music, and aestheticism just happens to align with the Western music viewpoint in general. That doesn't mean we can apply that value system to all kinds of music. So I hope you didn't find that too confusing. I hope to come back to that subject in the next few videos. I find it so fascinating myself. Feel free to give me any suggestions in the comments. Maybe you like this angle on philosophical thinking, or maybe you didn't. So YouTube cut off my ad revenue until I get 1,000 subscribers. Now, I haven't made enough money to actually get a check from YouTube, but I was on my way to getting my first base amount that you need for them to take the time to even give you the money and have it worth it. So if you just subscribe, you'll receive notifications for the next video when it comes out. And also you can send it to your friends, encourage your students to go and subscribe. It just helps. This is low budget, but it does help make it worth a little bit more TLC that I'm trying to give it. You see, I've been using this great studio at Open Signal in Portland, Oregon. They've helped me increase the quality by so much while also keeping my costs low. So you can think of subscribing as actually giving me a donation from YouTube. So please just send it to a few friends, hit subscribe, share it on social media. I would really appreciate it, and I'll hopefully see you very soon.